Nos dias 14, 15 e 16 de julho de 2014, aconteceu em Fortaleza a sexta cúpula dos chefes de Estado dos BRICS. Nessa oportunidade foi adotada a Declaração e o Plano de Ação de Fortaleza e, mais importante, foi criado o novo Banco de Desenvolvimento dos BRICS. Num outro lugar, distante do centro de convenções onde aconteceu a cúpula, aconteceram também os diálogos das sociedades civis sobre desenvolvimento. Chamados pelas organizações brasileiras, esses diálogos contaram com a participação de pessoas do mundo inteiro. Como parte do projeto Poderes Emergentes, Sexualidade e Direitos Humanos, o Observatório de Sexualidade Política documentou os diálogos e entrevistou ativistas, pesquisadores e pesquisadoras sobre a sua visão do fenômeno dos BRICS. E, mais importante, exploramos como as questões de gênero, sexualidade e direitos humanos se situam nesses debates. Em parceria com a Fábrica de Imagens, produzimos 8 vídeos que agora apresentamos a vocês com muito prazer.
I've just joined GCAP. That's the global campaign against poverty. I've just joined the gender task force, and we thought that it would be really interesting to come and see what sort of reaction in civil society, what a reaction to BRICS in civil society may look like, because Russia is hosting the next BRICS summit, and President Putin has said that the main topic will be about communication with civil society, and I have a strong opinion about that being a publicity move, and that what will really be happening in Russia is that only that those organizations who are pro-government will get to speak on behalf of society. So I think for me it was very important to come here and see what actual engagement looks like, and how we can maybe try and use some of this experience in Moscow if we were to also organize some sort of maybe parallel events. I mean, obviously, I think that I've seen that we, across the BRICS countries, share quite similar problems, have very similar issues in regards to women's rights, in regards to the labor movement, in regards to issues of economic inequality. But what was very interesting for me was that the civil society here, the voices that I heard here, were much more engaged in putting together all these ideas and really fleshing out big structural problems that have to do with capitalism, for example. And civil society in Russia hasn't really gotten that far yet. In Russia, we don't really talk about these, what our world looks like in its hyper-connected state. So that was really important to me to hear. Because, in Russia, we also have, for example, leftist groups who will talk about capitalism and who will talk about, maybe even feminism, but they are so marginalized that when you have maybe human rights representatives talking, they will never mention these problems. They will only talk about, very narrow issues. And that's a really kind of big problem at the moment in the Russian sort of, social rights movement. There is a real attempt to communicate with the BRICS leaders on part of various organizations like, Oxfam, for example, that they are trying to establish a dialogue. you know, when you come here and you hear people talking about all of these actual problems right here and now in communities, you understand that, you know, our leaders, they're not listening, and they can use maybe some of the same rhetoric. They can say that they'll be using these investments to, you know, for the good of the people, but I think it's clear that BRICS is very much about, you know, capital gain and about ideological opposition, and also about all of these countries now, you know, feeling very powerful, feeling that they have friends. It's kind of hard to know where to start, to be honest, but I mean, we all know about the LGBT laws. We know much less on an international level about what's been happening with women's rights and the laws that the government has been passing. But in the last couple of years, Russia has seen a real tightening of repressive legislation against women. So, for example, in 2011, a new set of laws was introduced that make getting a free abortion much more difficult. So, for example, Russian women now have to wait a whole week after first going to the doctor to then get an abortion. And in that week, they have to see a psychologist who will try and talk them out of getting an abortion, and who is a lot of the time affiliated with the church. Also, that really fits into a general morality panic that is happening right now. And the result of this morality panic is that women are being seen and are being talked about as exclusively belonging in the household, and as, you know, the position that the Ministry for Women's Affairs has at the moment is that all women should be getting married and having 4 or 5 children. And Russian women have traditionally been really represented in the work in the labor force, because obviously the Soviet Union had, you know, promoted that. And so on the one hand, most Russian women do work. On the other hand, they're being told to stay at home and care for their children. And produce children, produce citizens for the state, you know, bodies. And this means that Russian women at best have to carry both loads on their shoulders, so, you know, economic stability and child rearing responsibilities, and that's at best. And then at worst, they're being told to just stay in the household and just have children and be completely dependent on their husbands. The other really huge issue is domestic violence, and this rarely gets talked about, but really Russia has a huge problem with with about 14 or 15,000 women dying from domestic violence each year, and still no law against domestic violence, no law against rape in marriage, and a complete lack of crisis centers that women can go to. So there's maybe less than 50 in the whole country, and a culture of not talking about these issues. I think that the rhetoric that our government has been using is a really big warning signal of the fact that these issues are only going to be getting bigger and bigger, and that the government is not interested in listening to women, protecting women, or, you know, working for equality.